Did you know it's the 100-year anniversary of the federal income tax? Neither did I. So with this century mark, let's find out what the people on the streets of DC really know about the wonderful world of the federal income tax.
The expenses of the government reach everybody. Taxes take from everyone a part of his earnings and force everyone to work for a certain part of his time for the government.
What is the federal income tax?
Well, it's my contribution to run the federal government.
The bill you have to pay on income to the federal government.
It's the amount of money that the federal government takes out of your paycheck every single month, and then a big chunk at the end of the year.
So the federal income tax, among other things, is the mainstay of the federal tax system. It's our largest single tax. It's something that almost everybody pays. It's something that a lot of corporations pay too. But it's the way, principally, that the federal government raises the money we need to make the federal government go.
When do you think federal income tax started? What year?
I would say in the 50s.
I think it was probably in the 1800s, during the time of the Civil War.
20s or so, when the Federal Reserve came around that time.
The first federal income tax actually hit the law books in 1862 during the Civil War, because that war required a lot of money to fight. People wanted to raise that money in a new way that would seem fairer, and so they created an income tax. That tax, though, only lasts for 10 years. The tax that we know and hate or love or whatever it is today, it actually appeared in 1913. We're celebrating the centennial right now.
Why has the federal income tax lasted so long?
I think because it was an easy way to raise revenue, particularly through withholding.
Once any government starts getting a tax or becoming a taxing entity, they can't do without that money then.
Because to some extent it seems to have an overall way of functioning and working, the way the government works. Federal taxing is a way of diplomatically, I guess, having everyone do their fair share and paying taxes who can.
Well, I think that the income tax, for all its flaws, does two things really remarkably well. The first thing it does that every tax has to do is it raises money, and it raises it pretty efficiently and pretty quickly and in large quantities. At a lot of points in American history, that's crucial. But second, and really just as important if you're trying to explain why it's still here even though we don't like it, is that the income tax seems fair to most people.
So when it was first introduced, what percent rate do you think it was?
Oh, God. It's probably somewhere between 2 and 6%.
Probably in the single digits. 50%? I don't know.
7%.
7?
Yeah.
Wow.
The rate on the 1913 income tax topped out at 7%, which is a nice low number, one that most of us would envy today. What's striking about that number is that it didn't last for very long. So in 1913, it starts out at 7%. By 1918, the top rate is 77%.
What do you think the highest rate in history of taxes was? What percentage?
Maybe during the Depression, maybe 41, 42%.
Maybe during the 70s, like 60%.
World War II, possibly 48%.
So the highest rate ever imposed in the personal income tax was 94% during World War II. I mean, that's a number that is just almost impossible for us to imagine today. The rates didn't go down until the 1960s when John Kennedy proposed a significant tax cut, brought that top rate down from the 90% range to around 70%.
94%.
Good Lord.
Oh, wow.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
no, it's not that bad yet.
Exactly. What's the highest rate today? Percentage-wise?
In the 70s, 74% maybe?
God, like 45%, I think?
Highest rate is like 35 or 37%.
Today, we're just a shade under 40%, which is a significant change, and I think reflects how the world has changed quite a bit since World War II.
Historically, what do you think has caused politicians to raise income taxes?
Politicians raise income taxes either to fund new projects or initiatives or to pay down the debt or a combination of the two.
If they need to raise money to go to war or I don't know, start new domestic programs, they need to make up for that money somewhere.
I think it's probably a lot of it is due to government spending and the fact that the government is spending more revenue than it's actually taking in.
So, you know, taxes change when they have to, not when they should. Lawmakers have a way of making big changes to the tax system when the country's in trouble. Usually it's a war that does this. And so when you look back at the whole 200 years of American history and you're trying to figure out what did taxes do over these years, you find that the big changes come during the Civil War, during World War I, during World War II. There are some big changes during the Great Depression as well, because a major economic downturn can sort of focus their minds as well. But for the most part, it's wars that change the tax system.
What's tax reform?
Well, it's an attempt to simplify the huge Internal Revenue Code.
To me, tax reform would be throwing out the thousands and thousands of pages of current law.
Trying to control what can and cannot be taxed and who gets a say in that.
Bringing the tax code up to date, you know, removing maybe some deductions that don't need to be there anymore.
Tax reform is whatever somebody wants it to mean. I mean, tax reform is the tax system you want rather than the tax system you have. If you ask 10 people what tax reform is, you're going to get 10 different answers. Now, there are a few things that tend to emerge in those answers as commonly held goals. We would all like the tax system to be simpler because the income tax is complicated. Most of us would all be happy to pay less, or to at least pay at lower rates than we do.
What's Reaganomics?
Well, Reaganomics would be that if you cut taxes, that will stimulate the economy by putting more money in people's pockets, which they will go out and spend and consume more.
Reaganomics, that's the idea that more generous taxing of the rich, I guess, will trickle down to the rest of the economy.
It's like you cut taxes for the upper class in hopes that they'll spend money to buy put new jobs in place for people in the working class.
Reaganomics really refers to a constellation of economic policies that Ronald Reagan brings with him when he comes to the White House. A big part of that, and maybe the part that we remember most commonly, is tax cutting. Ronald Reagan ran on a sweeping 30% across-the-board tax cut for the income tax. He won the White House on that platform, and when he got in office, he followed through on it.
How would you change the tax system today?
By tax?
Yeah.
I guess like close loopholes and stuff like that.
I guess for me, I would lower it.
You know, I think the income tax has had a pretty good run. And I'd say that it's pretty creaky at this point, but it's still doing pretty well. It's still doing those two things reasonably well. It's raising a lot of money. It's still striking most people as pretty fair. I'd be surprised if we got another 100 years out of the income tax as it exists today. But I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. I think you might see new taxes appear. But again, taxes change when they have to, not when they should. And until the income tax simply isn't doing the job at all anymore, I think it's unlikely that lawmakers are going to let it go.